The acrid smell of burning pine and chaparral stung Alex Mason's nostrils, a scent that had become far too familiar this fire season. Below the landscape of the Sierra Madre foothills was a hellish mosaic of glowing orange, angry red, and billowing black smoke that clawed at the sapphire sky. The CH-54 Tarhay, affectionately nicknamed Sky Crane by its crews, vibrated around him a deep, resonant thrum that usually soothed his aviator's soul, but today only amplified the knot of anxiety tightening in his gut. He wasn't piloting this run. He was observing part of a multi-agency effort to assess response times and interdepartmental cooperation during major incidents. This particular incident, the Canyon Crest Fire, had exploded overnight driven by fierce Santa Ana winds and was now encroaching on the sprawling Oak Haven Estates, a relatively new development nestled uncomfortably close to the wildlands. Anything Eva. Alex's voice was calm, a practiced modulation designed to inspire confidence, even if his own was wavering. He adjusted his headset, the crackle of radio traffic a constant chaotic symphony. Captain Eva Rostova. Her dark hair, pulled back severely from a face etched with concentration, shook her head, her gloved hands firm on the controls. Negative, Director. Smoke's too thick to get a visual on the primary extraction point. Ground team says Miller's still in the house southeast corner of the development, but the access road is compromised. Fires jumped it. Sergeant James Miller retired, 72 years old. Double amputee below the knee, a legacy from a long-ago war in a humid, distant jungle. His file, which Alex had reviewed just hours ago, painted a picture of a resilient man, fiercely independent, but now trapped by fire and his own immobility. What about the community green space, just north of his indicated position? Alex pointed through the reinforced plexiglass. It was a patch of incongruous emerald amidst the advancing chaos, bordered by meticulously kept homes, and on its western edge, a ridiculously ostentatious white vinyl fence. Eva banked the heavy helicopter, the rotors beating against the increasingly turbulent air. Looks like our best bet, sir. If we can get downwind of that smoke plume, it's tight but doable. Ground says it's clear of obstructions mostly. Mostly. They mentioned some overzealous HOA security. Let's hope they understand the concept of emergency. Eva's tone was dry. As they descended, the community green space came into sharper focus. It was indeed the only viable option. But standing near the center of it, arms akimbo, was a figure in a crisp, almost military-style khaki uniform, complete with a gold-colored shield-shaped badge glinting on his chest. He was gesticulating wildly towards them, then towards the white fence, his movements agitated, clearly confrontational even from this altitude. "You've got to be kidding me," Eva muttered, her voice tight with disbelief. "Is that guy waving us off?" The figure below, who they would soon come to know as Ron Donaldson, head of Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association Security, planted his feet firmly, a human roadblock, against a multi-ton rescue helicopter attempting to save a man's life. The pristine white fence, an emblem of suburban order, seemed to be his primary concern. Alex felt a surge of incredulous anger, cold and sharp. "Get us down there, Captain. As safely and quickly as you can. Looks like our interagency cooperation assessment just got a real-world test subject." His ordinary role for this flight, an observer with a standard emergency services volunteer ID, was about to become very insufficient. The weight of his actual position, State Aviation Director, pressed down on him. This wasn't just incompetence. This was obstruction of a life-saving mission. The life Alex Mason usually inhabited was one of carefully structured days policy meetings and the complex ballet of aviation logistics that kept California's airspace safe and functional. His office in Sacramento, overlooking the river, was lined with aeronautical charts and model airplanes, testaments to a lifelong passion that had begun with childhood dreams and solidified in the unforgiving skies of a combat zone. He'd flown Chinooks in the dust storms of Iraq medevacs under fire experiences that had etched into him an unshakable respect for the sanctity of life and the critical role aviation played in preserving it. Now, as State Aviation Director, he wielded a different kind of power, one of regulation and oversight, but the core mission, safety and access, remained his guiding principle. He'd chosen to be on this particular observation flight, a last-minute addition to the manifest, because the Canyon Crest Fire was shaping up to be a monster. He wanted a first-hand look at how resources were being deployed, where the system flexed and where it broke. He hadn't anticipated a breakdown quite this absurd. His volunteer ID clipped to his fire-resistant flight suit read, Alex M., Emergency Air Support Logistics. It was intentionally vague, allowing him to observe, without the immediate deference or defensiveness his full title often elicited. Oak Haven Estates was a community he knew by reputation. It had sprung up quickly, marketed as an idyllic retreat from the urban sprawl complete with stringent rules and an HOA board known for its zealous enforcement of aesthetic conformity. Whispers of their rigidity had reached even his circles, tales of fines for improperly colored trash cans and disputes over lawn gnome placement. Ron Donaldson, a retired mall security chief, had found his calling there, a petty kingdom, where his word was law. He patrolled the manicured streets in a golf cart equipped with a flashing yellow light, his authority largely self-proclaimed, but rarely challenged by residents cowed by the HOA's thick rulebook. Sergeant James Miller had moved to Oak Haven 2 years prior, hoping for a peaceful retirement. His small, meticulously maintained bungalow was his sanctuary. His prosthetic legs, though functional, made quick movement difficult, especially over uneven terrain. He'd followed the initial evacuation advisories, packing a small go-bag, but the fire had moved with terrifying speed, a rogue ember carried by the wind, igniting the dry brush canyon behind his property, cutting off his planned route before the official mandatory order came through. His calls to 911 had registered his critical situation, making his rescue a priority. The Sky Crane. A behemoth designed for heavy lifting and firefighting was not a subtle machine. As Ava expertly maneuvered it towards the green, the downdraft whipped the trees lining the space into a frenzy, sending leaves and debris swirling. Ron Donaldson, however, stood his ground, his face now visible a mask of indignation. He was shouting, though his words were lost in the roar of the turbines. "He's actually trying to stop us." Eva said, a note of sheer disbelief in her voice. She brought the helicopter into a low hover, just feet above the grass, the wind from the rotors flattening the grass around Donaldson, who staggered slightly but held his position. The heat from the approaching fire was palpable, even inside the cockpit, a dry baking wave that carried the scent of imminent destruction. "Radio him." Alex ordered, his voice hard. "Standard emergency frequency. Identify ourselves as State Emergency Response Life-Threatening Situation, immediate landing required." The co-pilot, a young National Guardsman named Peterson, fumbled for a second with the comms, his eyes wide. "Yes, sir." He broadcast the message, his voice a little shaky. Donaldson had a handheld radio clipped to his belt. He unclipped it, listened for a moment, then barked something into it, his gaze fixed defiantly on the helicopter. He made no move to clear the area. Instead, he took a step towards them, then gestured angrily towards the white fence, which was indeed close to where the tail rotor would be if they landed fully. "No response, sir, or rather he's telling us this is private property and we're trespassing," Peterson relayed, looking aghast. "He says he'll have us fined for property damage if we scuff the grass." Alex stared at Donaldson. The man was a caricature, a parody of officiousness, yet the danger he posed was terrifyingly real. Every second wasted was a second closer to Sergeant Miller, being consumed by the inferno that was now licking at the edge of the development, visible as a hellish orange glow through the dense trees at the end of the cul-de-sac where Miller lived. "Eve," Alex said, his decision made. "There's a patch just to his right, a bit rougher, closer to those ornamental shrubs. Can you put us down there? It'll be tight, but it looks like the only section he's not currently occupying." "It's going to be sporty, Director, and those shrubs will take a beating. Hope they're not prize winners." Ava's grim humor was a welcome release. She was a consummate professional, already adjusting the helicopter's position. "The shrubs can be replaced," Alex stated flatly. "Sergeant Miller cannot." The landing was, as Eva predicted, sporty. The Sky Crane settled with a jarring thud, one skid sinking slightly into the softer earth near a bed of manicured azaleas. The rotor wash thrashed the prize-winning shrubs mercilessly. The moment the ramp began to lower, Donaldson was upon them, his face puce with fury. "What in the Sam Hill do you think you're doing?" He bellowed, his voice surprisingly loud over the whining down of the turbines. This is an HOA-managed recreational area. You can't just land a damn war machine here. That's a violation of Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 2, unauthorized vehicular access. Alex, followed by 2 members of the helicopter's rescue crew, strode down the ramp. He kept his expression neutral, though the effort was considerable. "Sir, we are State Emergency Response. There is a disabled resident trapped by the fire approximately 200 yards from here. We are evacuating him." "I don't care if the Queen of England is trapped." Donaldson jabbed a finger towards the pristine white fence, now perilously close to the still spinning tail rotor. "You are endangering HOA property. That fence is brand new custom vinyl, cost the association $12,000. If your contraption scratches it, your department will be paying for a full replacement." One of the rescue crew, a seasoned paramedic named Diaz, muttered under his breath, "$12,000 for a plastic fence while a man's about to burn. Priorities." Alex ignored Diaz's comment, though he shared the sentiment. "Sir, a man's life is at stake. We need access now. Please step aside and allow my team to proceed." He tried to keep his tone reasonable, still operating under the guise of a generic emergency responder. He hoped, perhaps naively, that the sheer urgency of the situation would penetrate Donaldson's bureaucratic fog. Donaldson puffed out his chest. "I am in charge of security for Oak Haven Estates, and I am telling you, you are not authorized to be here. This area," he swept his arm around dramatically, "is for residents and their approved guests only. You are neither, and you are certainly not approved to be damaging our landscaping." He eyed the flattened grass and battered azaleas with a proprietary glare. The fire was making its presence known more aggressively now. A thick, acrid plume of smoke billowed over the nearby houses, and the distant roar was punctuated by the sharp crackle of consuming flames. The air was getting hotter, the light taking on an eerie orange tint. Time was a luxury they didn't have. "There's no time for this," Alex said, his patience wearing thin. He took a step towards the path leading to Miller's Street. Donaldson moved to block him, surprisingly agile for a man of his bulk. "I am not authorizing access through HOA property for this unauthorized operation. You'll need to find another route." "Another route?" Alex repeated, incredulity lacing his voice. "The access roads are blocked by fire. This is the only route. Are you deliberately trying to obstruct a life-saving mission?" "I am upholding the rules and regulations of the Oak Haven Homeowners Association." Donaldson stated, his chin jutting out. "Rules that ensure the peace, tranquility, and property values of our community." Perhaps if Sergeant Miller had adhered to the evacuation advisories in a more timely fashion, this entire unpleasantness could have been avoided. The callousness of the remark, the victim-blaming, struck Alex like a physical blow. The veneer of professional detachment he usually maintained began to crack. "He's a disabled veteran, Mr. Donaldson, Ron Donaldson, head of security." He tapped his flimsy badge. "Mr. Donaldson, his disability prevents rapid evacuation. That's why we're here. Now, are you going to step aside, or am I going to have to consider this willful obstruction of an emergency rescue, which I assure you carries severe penalties?" Alex's voice had dropped a cold edge creeping in. Donaldson actually scoffed. "Threats? Are you threatening me, son? I deal with troublemakers all the time. You flyboys think you can just swoop in and do whatever you please. Well, not in Oak Haven. Not on my watch. I'm calling the sheriff. We'll see who's obstructing whom." He reached for his radio again, a smug look on his face. This was escalating beyond mere bureaucratic idiocy. This was active, dangerous interference. Alex knew that if they waited for local sheriffs to arrive and sort this out, it could be too late for Sergeant Miller. The heat was intensifying, and the smoke was becoming a choking blanket. "Captain Rostova," Alex said into his own headset comm, "can you raise the county sheriff on your direct line? Inform them we have an individual actively obstructing a critical air rescue operation at Oak Haven Estates. Request immediate assistance, and inform them the State Aviation Director is on site." A brief pause. "Copy that, Director. Transmitting now." Eva's voice was clipped all business. Donaldson, who had only caught the last part about the State Aviation Director, paused his own call, a flicker of something, surprise confusion, in his eyes. "State Aviation Director. What are you talking about? You're just some glorified taxi service." Alex met Donaldson's gaze. The time for subtlety was over. He reached into a pocket of his flight suit, the one where he kept his primary identification, not the volunteer badge. "Mr. Donaldson, my name is Alex Mason. He produced the leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal the official shield and credentials of the Director of Aviation for the state of California. And you are currently preventing me and my team from performing a lawful and critical emergency evacuation, thereby directly endangering the life of Sergeant James Miller. This is your final opportunity to step aside and cooperate. If you do not, I will have you arrested for obstruction of justice, reckless endangerment, and any other applicable charges the district attorney can think of. The color drained from Donaldson's face. His jaw, moments before set in stubborn defiance, went slack. The hand holding his radio trembled slightly. He looked from the impressive badge to Alex's unwavering eyes, then back again. The flimsy gold-colored shield on his own chest suddenly seemed tawdry and ridiculous even to him. For a moment, Alex thought the man might actually comply. The revelation of his identity had clearly shaken Donaldson's self-assured bluster. But then a strange, mulish expression settled back onto Donaldson's features. Perhaps it was the sunk-cost fallacy of his own arrogance, or maybe he genuinely believed his HOA authority was sacrosanct. I don't care who you say you are," Donaldson stammered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "This is still HOA property. You can't just commandeer it. There are procedures, forms to be filled, insurance waivers." Alex stared at him aghast. The man was truly lost in his own petty fiefdom, unable to see the inferno creeping closer, unable to prioritize a human life over his perceived authority and the sanctity of a vinyl fence. "Forms," Alex repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. While a man is about to burn to death, before Alex could physically remove Donaldson, which he was seconds from doing, a new sound cut through the air, the wail of approaching sirens. Ava's call had been effective. 2 Sheriff's Department cruisers' lights, flashing, careened around the corner, bumping unceremoniously over the curb of the community green, their tires leaving muddy tracks on the manicured grass, a sight that under other circumstances might have given Donaldson an apoplexy. 2 deputies emerged, their expressions grim, as they took in the scene: the massive helicopter, the smoke, Alex and his crew in their fire gear, and Donaldson looking increasingly unhinged. "What's the situation here?" The senior deputy, a tall, weathered man with Sergeant Ramirez on his name tag, called out, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Sergeant Ramirez," Alex said, stepping forward, identification still in hand. "I am Alex Mason, State Aviation Director. We're here to evacuate a disabled veteran trapped by the fire. This individual," he gestured towards Donaldson, "is Mr. Ron Donaldson, HOA Security. He has been actively obstructing our landing and access to the victim, citing HOA regulations and concerns about property damage, specifically that fence." Alex pointed to the white vinyl structure, which was now starting to look a little warped from the radiant heat. Ramirez's eyes, hard and experience, flicked from Alex's credentials to Donaldson, then to the advancing fire line, now alarmingly close, visible through a gap in the houses. He'd seen his share of disasters and obstructive fools. Donaldson, perhaps seeing the deputies as his salvation, puffed himself up again. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. These men landed this behemoth without authorization. They're trespassing, damaging HOA property. I was just doing my job, protecting our community assets." Ramirez gave Donaldson a long, unimpressed look. "Sir, there's a life-or-death emergency here, a wildfire. Your fence is not the priority." He turned back to Alex. "Director Mason, what do you need?" "We need him out of the way so my team can get to Sergeant Miller. He's wasted precious minutes already." Alex's voice was tight with controlled fury. Diaz and the other crew member were already shifting impatiently, their medical kits in hand, their eyes fixed on the street leading to Miller's house. "Mr. Donaldson." Ramirez said, his voice now devoid of any patience. "You are interfering with an active emergency rescue operation. I am ordering you to step away from these responders and cease your obstruction immediately. Failure to do so will result in your arrest." Donaldson's face contorted. This was not how he had envisioned this encounter. He was used to being the one giving orders, the one citing rules. But the bylaws, the fence, it's a $12,000 fence. His voice cracked with a bizarre blend of desperation and outrage. It was as if the fence itself had become a living entity he was duty-bound to protect. Suddenly, a deeper, more sinister layer to Donaldson's obsession began to surface, not from him, but from an unexpected source. An elderly woman, her face pale with fear and smudged with soot, had emerged from a nearby house, her small dog yipping nervously in her arms. She recognized Donaldson and the deputies. "Officers that manned Donaldson," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He's been horrible to Sergeant Miller for months. Just last week, he tried to get the HOA to find Jim, Sergeant Miller, because the ramp Jim built to get his wheelchair up to his porch wasn't, and I quote, in keeping with the aesthetic harmony of the community. He said it was an eyesore. He's been looking for ways to make Jim's life difficult, ever since Jim challenged him at an HOA meeting about the exorbitant security fees. The revelation hung in the superheated air. This wasn't just about a fence or a misplaced devotion to rules. There was a personal animus, a petty vendetta fueling Donaldson's dangerous obstinacy. He wasn't just an overzealous fool, he was a malicious one, willing to let a man he disliked perish, rather than cede an inch of his perceived authority or allow a rescue that might, in his twisted view, somehow vindicate his adversary. Alex looked at Donaldson, a new level of contempt hardening his gaze. The man's obsession with the fence wasn't just about HOA funds, it was a symbol of his power, a power he'd clearly abused. The image of Sergeant Miller, a war hero being harassed over an access ramp by this tin pot dictator, filled Alex with a cold rage. "Mr. Donaldson," Alex said, his voice like ice, "your concern for that fence in light of what this lady has just said, and in the face of an imminent life-threatening situation for Sergeant Miller, is not just negligent, it's potentially criminal. You're not just obstructing a rescue. You're actively endangering a man you have a documented history of harassing." Ramirez, his face grim, nodded curtly to his partner. "Cuff him." "What arrest me?" Donaldson shrieked, his eyes wide with panic, as the younger deputy approached him with handcuffs. "You can't. I'm HOA security. I have rights. This is an outrage. The fence, the bylaws." He was still babbling about regulations and property values as the deputy efficiently secured his hands behind his back. His ridiculous gold badge glinted mockingly as he was firmly escorted towards one of the patrol cars. With Donaldson neutralized, Alex turned to his team. "Diaz, Henderson, let's go. Peterson, stay with the aircraft. Keep comms open with Captain Rostova." The three of them sprinted down the path towards Miller's cul-de-sac. The heat was intense now, the air thick with smoke that burned their lungs and stung their eyes. Flames were visible at the end of the street, already consuming a tool shed in a neighboring yard. Miller's small bungalow was at the very end, perilously close to the advancing fire front. They found him in his living room, sitting calmly in his wheelchair, a damp cloth over his face. The room was filled with smoke, but he'd managed to close most of the windows. A small packed duffel bag sat at his feet. "Sergeant Miller." Alex called out, his voice slightly muffled by the heat and smoke. "State emergency response. We're here to get you out." Miller looked up, his eyes, though weary, were clear. "Took you fellas long enough," he said, a dry chuckle and a cough. "Was starting to think I'd have to use my old trenching skills to dig a firebreak around the petunias." Despite the dire situation, Alex felt a smile touch his lips. The man's resilience was palpable. "Sorry for the delay, Sergeant. Had a bit of local resistance. Let's get you moving." Diaz and Henderson quickly and expertly transferred Miller to a portable evacuation chair. As they carried him out, the heat from the fire pressing against their backs, Alex glanced back at the house. Flames were already licking at the wooden eaves of the porch, the ramp Donaldson had complained about directly in their path. The irony was bitter. Back at the green, Eva had managed to reposition the sky crane slightly, giving them a clearer path to the ramp, despite the now singed azaleas. Donaldson was secured in the back of Ramirez's cruiser, his indignant protests still faintly audible. The white vinyl fence, their initial point of contention, was now visibly drooping and blistering in several sections from the radiant heat of the approaching blaze, a monument to misplaced priorities, beginning to succumb to the very disaster its protector had ignored. Sergeant Miller was loaded onto the helicopter. Alex took a last look at the scene, the encroaching fire, the deputies securing the area, the bewildered neighbors emerging from their homes, and the smoldering remains of Donaldson's authority. He climbed into the sky crane, the door sealing behind him, a barrier against the chaos. "All clear, Director," Ava said, her voice steady. "Let's get Sergeant Miller to the field hospital." As the sky crane lifted off, ascending above the smoke and flames, Alex watched the scene recede. Oak Haven Estates, with its manicured lawns and its precious now damaged fence, looked small and insignificant against the terrifying majesty of the wildfire. He thought of Donaldson, stewing in the back of a police car, his reign of petty tyranny abruptly ended. And he thought of Sergeant Miller, safe now, his quiet courage a stark contrast to Donaldson's loud bluster. The immediate aftermath was a blur of activity. Sergeant Miller was taken to a temporary medical facility for smoke inhalation, but was otherwise unharmed, his stoicism intact. Alex, having shed his observer role, was now fully engaged as State Aviation Director, coordinating with various agencies, redirecting air assets, and ensuring that the lines of communication so dangerously frayed by Donaldson's actions were reinforced. The Canyon Crest Fire raged for another 3 days before containment lines held, leaving a scar across the landscape and impacting hundreds of lives. Oak Haven Estates, miraculously, was largely spared thanks to a shift in wind and the relentless efforts of firefighting crews on the ground and in the air. Sergeant Miller's house suffered significant damage but was not entirely lost. The infamous white vinyl fence, however, was a melted, misshapen ruin, a fitting epitaph to Donaldson's folly. Ron Donaldson faced a litany of charges: obstruction of an emergency operation, reckless endangerment, and after further investigation, spurred by the elderly neighbor's testimony and Alex's official report, charges relating to harassment and abuse of his HOA authority. The district attorney, galvanized by the high-profile nature of the case and the clear evidence of malice, pursued the prosecution vigorously. Donaldson, stripped of his HOA security title and facing financial ruin from impending civil suits, became a local pariah. His attempts to portray himself as a misunderstood guardian of community standards fell flat against the backdrop of a life nearly lost due to his pig-headedness. The HOA board of Oak Haven Estates, deeply embarrassed and under intense pressure from residents and the media, issued a public apology to Sergeant Miller and to the state emergency services. They quickly moved to overhaul their security protocols and review their bylaw enforcement, vowing a new era of common sense and compassion. The power vacuum left by Donaldson was filled by a committee of residents, including, surprisingly, Sergeant Miller himself, who, once recovered, decided that if you wanted something done right, you sometimes had to do it yourself. For Alex Mason, the incident at Oak Haven was more than just another critical event in a demanding job. It was a stark reminder of how easily human systems, even those designed to protect, could be perverted by ego and misplaced priorities. He'd seen bravery and resilience in Sergeant Miller and Captain Rostova, and the ugly face of petty tyranny in Ron Donaldson. The experience spurred him to action beyond the immediate crisis. Leveraging the widespread media attention the Donaldson incident had garnered, Alex spearheaded a legislative effort. Working with state senators and assembly members, many of whom were shocked by the details of the Oak Haven rescue, he championed a new bill. It was colloquially dubbed Miller's Law, though its official title was the Emergency Flight Access and Responder Protection Act. The proposed legislation was comprehensive. It unequivocally affirmed the state's authority to commandeer private property for legitimate life-saving emergency air operations. It established clear, severe penalties for any individual, regardless of official or unofficial standing, who willfully obstructed such operations. It also mandated training for local officials and private security personnel on emergency protocols and the primacy of state and federal emergency directives. Alex found himself in a new kind of battle this time, in committee rooms and legislative chambers, arguing not against flames, but against bureaucratic inertia, and occasionally, surprisingly, against pockets of resistance from private property rights advocates who misunderstood the bill's narrow and critical focus. He testified, presented evidence from the Oak Haven incident, and shared stories of other less dramatic but equally frustrating instances where access had been delayed by red tape or uncooperative landowners. He spoke of the golden hour in medical emergencies, the critical minutes that could mean the difference between life and death, minutes that could be squandered arguing over a fence. Sergeant Miller, at Alex's invitation, also testified before the legislative committee. His quiet dignity, his first-hand account of being trapped, and his gentle but firm rebuke of the mindset that prioritized property over people resonated deeply with the lawmakers. He didn't speak with anger, but with a profound sadness that such a law was even necessary. He spoke of service of duty and of the simple human decency that should compel everyone to help not hinder those in peril. The debate was intense at times. Lobbyists for large landowners and some HOAs raised concerns about potential abuses of power and property damage liability. Alex and his team worked tirelessly to address these concerns, incorporating amendments that clarified procedures for damage claims while still prioritizing the emergency and ensuring robust oversight. They emphasized that the law was a shield for the vulnerable, not a sword against property owners acting in good faith. The climax of this legislative battle came during the final vote on the assembly floor. The gallery was packed with emergency responders, aviation professionals, and concerned citizens, including a delegation from Oak Haven Estates, there to support the bill. Alex sat with Sergeant Miller and Captain Rostova. As the votes were tallied and the bill passed, with a significant majority, a wave of relief and quiet satisfaction washed over them. It wasn't a victory in a war, but it was a significant battle won for common sense and human compassion. In the weeks and months that followed, Miller's law was signed by the governor and went into effect. It became a model for similar legislation in other states. Training programs were rolled out, and Alex found himself traveling sharing the lessons of Oak Haven and the principles behind the new law. Ron Donaldson was eventually convicted on several charges, though not all. He received a sentence that included jail time, significant fines, and mandatory community service, specifically working with organizations that assisted disabled veterans. The irony was not lost on anyone. His prized fence at Oak Haven was eventually replaced, but not with an identical ostentatious vinyl barrier. Instead, the community under its new HOA leadership, and with input from Sergeant Miller, opted for a lower, more discreet fence with designated emergency access gates and a small, tastefully designed helipad built on a reinforced section of the community green. It was named the Miller Landing Pad. The community of Oak Haven, initially fractured and embarrassed by the incident, slowly began to heal. The shared experience, the near tragedy, and the subsequent positive changes forged a new sense of unity. Neighbors who had previously only exchanged curt nods began to talk to connect. They held a fundraiser for those affected by the Canyon Crest fire, with Sergeant Miller as the guest of honor. The atmosphere at HOA meetings, once tense and adversarial, became more collaborative, more focused on genuine community well-being rather than nitpicking rules. Alex Mason often thought back to that smoke-filled day. The image of Donaldson, red-faced and belligerent, standing before the mighty sky crane, a tiny David against a life-saving Goliath, but armed with the dangerous weapon of bureaucratic obstruction, was seared into his memory. It was a reminder of the fragility of order when confronted by chaos, and the even greater fragility of compassion when choked by ego. He visited Sergeant Miller occasionally. They'd sit on Miller's rebuilt porch, now with a ramp that was not only functional, but aesthetically pleasing, a small act of defiance and good taste, and talk not just about aviation or emergencies, but about life service and the unexpected turns fate could take. Miller never expressed bitterness towards Donaldson, only a kind of weary pity. "Some folks just get lost in their own little kingdoms, Director," he'd say, looking out over the healing landscape. "Forget what's really important." Alex knew those words held a profound truth. His job was about systems, regulations, and machines, but at its heart, it was about people. It was about ensuring that when the call came, when lives hung in the balance, the sky offered a pathway to safety, unblocked by fences, real or metaphorical. The weight of his knowing, the responsibility that came with his position, felt immense at times, but it was a weight leavened by the knowledge that for every Donaldson, there were countless Millers and Rostovas, individuals who, when faced with a crisis, chose courage and compassion over conformity and conflict. The roar of the Sky Crane's engines, once a sound of urgent anxiety, now often carried for him an echo of hope, a testament to a system that could learn, adapt, and ultimately prioritize the irreplaceable value of a human life above all else. The legislative changes were a concrete legacy, a systemic guardrail against future follies, ensuring that the skies remained open for rescue, for hope, for humanity. And in the quiet courage of a disabled veteran and the determined professionalism of a skilled pilot, Alex found a renewed faith in the enduring power of the human spirit to rise above the smoke and ashes, stronger and more united.